So
So, Albert, why do you regret your 3 years?
Uh, just because I've found it to be of essentially no use. And I spent 3 years struggling and studying on this subject that, in fact, I found to be ultimately useless. I regret that I didn't spend it studying French or German, um,
Well,
or
I took
some active
one year
language.
of Latin in the same school and then switched to French. And I somewhat regret it. Number one, because the Latin teacher was really good and the French teachers were terrible. And but what I learned from Latin was it was the first time that I learned anything about grammar, what a noun was and what a verb
Exactly.
was,
Exactly.
and uh, and that was and also it's what one studies in Latin is the constructed language, which is not what people spoke, and that is a kind of an aesthetic object, which I gather from my father, who studied Latin much more, was quite a beautiful thing.
mm,
Interesting. Some of the students in my class actually
I'm going to
talked
fix it.
to each other in Latin. I never got there. Of course, you have to ask the question, how do they know how it was pronounced? I mean, what was the basis for knowing what the pronunciation was?
yeah.
That's why I
So
could manage Latin. I never learned to speak French or German, but I had 4 years of Latin and I got advanced placement on my college boards. And like you, David, that's how I learned the English language.
See, back in my
I also
back
got advanced placement in French, and then I took the introductory French literature class, and I didn't understand a word. It was all the lectures were in French. I couldn't write papers in French. I wrote them in English and then translated them laboriously into French. And uh, I probably I probably got a good grade, but it was agony.
See, I
I
have
You
a
know,
parallel thing
oh, go
with
ahead.
German. I have a parallel thing with German. Didn't take German in high school. I took it in college. After 1 year, I passed well enough to that I could take German literature or something like that, which was a total mistake because I didn't know enough. Um, I would read stuff in English and, go around it. I should have just taken another year of grammar and study. That would have given me a much more solid thing.
If I can remember from last week, Rick, I think you told us you grew up speaking German and French, if I'm not mistaken.
No,
Uh,
that's correct. That's right. I did.
and
I didn't learn English until my parents put me in a kindergarten class when I was 5 years old, whereupon I had to learn it and learn it fast in order to survive. So that was the goal that got me to be an English speaker.
Was
if
that
we,
traumatic? Was that
Uh,
traumatic being in kindergarten at 5 and not speaking a word of English at first?
Well, I don't remember it being difficult at all. My parents loved to tell the story the way parents do, that they were called in by the teacher and asked to help the teacher out because when the teacher would hold up a picture of a dog and ask the assembled students, me among them, what is this? And the students were expected to say dog. I apparently jumped up and insisted,
Good.
no, it was Hund. And they couldn't understand
Yeah.
that the appropriate word was Hund. And it was making life for the teacher difficult.
yeah,
Especially since it was your name.
right. Yeah, in my house, my parents didn't speak German, though they'd come over. They just didn't want us to speak the language of the enemy in the streets of East Orange. But I certainly knew the word Schweinhund, which they used liberally in the midst of English. Du Schweinhund.
You know where I learned German? I
as we
took a
discovered
couple.
last week, Bob.
Well, no, I actually took a couple of summer jobs um, heavy labor jobs in Germany while we're in college. First on a farm in Westphalia, and then in Hamburg. And because in those days I was competing in wrestling, and I wanted to have demanding work during the summer to build myself up. Um, but it one of the summers, I then took a trip in Spain with a wrestling team friend named J.C. von Helms, who had been spending the the summer in Tübingen at the university, and he had a very peculiar way of looking at things. He referred to people who studied Latin as damned Latinists. And apparently there was rivalry between the Hellenic scholars and the Latin ones. But I'm not current in Latin, but I really find it charming. Sometimes, just for the fun of it, I will translate something on Google Translate into Latin, and then you can listen to it too. You can have it read aloud to you, and I find really a lot of fun as a language.
I thought we were going to talk about DSA today.
What happened to near that? Say it again,
I
please.
thought we were going to talk about DSA.
Well, I think we're going to talk about whatever we want to talk about. Although I'll be a little shocked, maybe disappointed if we don't get to DSA at some point, but that's up to us, not to me. Bob, if I'm following you, you grew up in Germany, is that correct? Bob, you grew up in Germany?
No, not at all. I mean,
you were traveling there in the summer times.
Yes, it was summer job.
I got it.
Because
Okay.
they used to still need Gastarbeiter because they had lost so much of their population during the Second World War, and but it was very confusing. The first summer I went there, and by the end of the summer, I couldn't speak a single sentence in any language because I was I was working on a farm, and the son of the farmer wanted to learn English, so I was helping him. And a neighbor spoke to me in French because he'd spent the war mainly in Paris, and he that was fun for him. And I was, of course, learning German. And then I was speaking to some Italian workers in the farmer's brick factory in Spanish because I didn't speak Italian. And so, but we could understand each other. So by the end of the summer, I couldn't speak a single a single full sentence in any language, and I was wondering how the heck I was going to go back to college.
So I'm thinking we're hearing here some enviable paths, those who learned other languages from the get-go early on, and some others were learning, hey, wait a minute, there are some stumbles along the way. So because we have open mic today, we have an opportunity to learn detail about those who are just joining us. Bob being that person, let's go around and the rest of us very quickly introduce ourselves the way we typically do. And we'll turn to you, Bob, not for very long, but to hear just a little bit about what the decades have done to get you to here. I'll start with what's on my screen. Hamp, if you'd kick us off here.
I'm from New York and Boston, and it was very important to me that I lived on 90 miles out from New York City on Long Island, and I was between. I was with the all year round people in the winter and in the public school, and then in the summer, my parents put me in with people from New York, the summer people, and that was sort of intriguing and traumatic, and it's had a big influence on the rest of my life.
Aha. Bill Collins.
Bill Collins grew up in the Boston area, Harvard 63, of course. Navy 20 years. I've been reflecting on what's been reported for the aircraft carriers or the aircraft carrier, I should say, in the Persian Gulf area, or rather over there. And I also wanted to mention that I grew up in the day of the Latin Mass, so I learned Latin pronunciation from that. And I've sung a lot of church music in Latin, which has its own pronunciation and so on. But I'm living in South Carolina now, where I moved about 35 years ago to work at the Savannah River site, managing cleanup.
Where in South Carolina?
Aiken. The Savannah River site, I don't know if you know what that is or not. I'll talk very briefly about that. During the Cold War, the Savannah River site had 5 operating reactors that produced plutonium and tritium for nuclear weapons, as well as other radioisotopes for medical purposes and so on. And it's all shut down now and being cleaned up. But they had the 5 reactors and 2 very heavily shielded remote operated chemical processing plants to extract the material. And the waste was put aside until later in huge underground tanks, and later came finally, so it's being cleaned up. So I live here with my wife. My children are elsewhere.
And your Latin is with a South Carolina accent now.
Yes, no doubt.
Albert, please give us a brief précis.
Okay. One of 7 from Bronx Science who went directly to Harvard. And I was in New York, in the Bronx, up until then, and then in the Boston area since then, with the exception of 2 years of mandatory work in the boondocks before taking up an academic position in the mother city of Cambridge. I've been on the faculty at MIT for 49 years before I retired in computer science and really highly mathematical computer science.
And Latin and its structure didn't particularly appeal. We'll come back to that. Thank you very much, David. Well,
I'm in New York City. I'm from New York. I went to high school with Albert, and I left Harvard and Cambridge 2 weeks before graduation, and direct to India, and got bitten by my interest in India, not a religious interest, but the society and history of India, and ultimately became a historian of India. And the language I know best, aside from my New York English, is Urdu.
oh my goodness. Wow. Alden.
Grew up on a farm in northwestern Connecticut. After Harvard, I taught in Aiken, South Carolina for 3 years. And then I got a Master of Arts in Teaching at Johns Hopkins and taught there. And then I taught in an inner city school in New Haven, not Yale. And lived in D.C., Flint, Michigan, Chicago, and just south of San Francisco. In terms of ships that where people are not happy, my college roommate, Brad Howe, was in the Navy for 3 years after college. And he said one of the great crises that they had was his destroyer ran out of toilet paper. And they were signaling all kinds of other ships with an emergency SOS. Do you have any toilet paper?
What field were you in?
What field was I in? I majored in history.
Oh, I see. So you were teaching history?
I was teaching kids, basically. It was junior high school, so I taught English, history, and then the last year I taught math.
Why did you come to Aiken? I'm curious.
Yes, I noticed the first one was Aiken.
Yeah, there was a school there, and I applied, and the headmaster had been an All-American soccer player at Yale in 1929, and he had a good friend who was a dean at Harvard, and so he advertised the position there, and then I went and talked to, I think it was Kitty von Stade, and then went and got the job. So I ended
Yeah,
up
that was Aiken Prep, probably.
exactly. Yeah.
Yes, it still exists.
Aiken Prep was set up there to train the sons of the New England or Northern aristocracy who wintered in Aiken. In case you
Exactly.
don't know what wintering means, it means you send your wife and your polo ponies and your groom down to Aiken in the fall, and then then around Christmas you go down there for a couple of weeks and you ride to the hounds in the morning, and then you play a
Right,
couple
right.
of chukkers of polo in the afternoon.
Exactly, and that's still going on here.
Good. I'm glad that's continued. Do you play polo and chuck and ride at the hounds?
No, I do not. I'm not one of those. I'm a sailor, so I had a sailboat for years up at a lake here, and I'd haul it down to the coast now and then. I've sold the sailboat, but I used to sail. That was my recreational activity for years.
And not only not the robot dog that's famous here in
Yeah.
Boston. In fact, although out of MIT.
Yeah, they still ride to the hounds in Aiken, this large public forest area called Hitchcock Woods, which is donated by one of the winter colony people to the city. It's an immense forest area.
Yeah.
And they still ride to the hounds through that woods.
We've made a connection here that we did not have until this moment. How about it? Ron Blau.
My Latin is terrible. I studied it in East Orange, New Jersey at Clifford J. Scott High School. And Mr. Smith had very neat handwriting, but we only learned Latin to English. So of course we could translate, Agricola eventually, but we'd never learned to, say the farmer is happy in Latin. So consequently, my Latin is terrible. But a cousin was visiting and said, "Why don't you apply to Harvard?" Which never occurred to me, and I applied to Harvard. And so I graduated, went into TV and video, still doing that, working on a video about Trump's corruption, another video about Trump's corruption for an organization I've mentioned too many times, Volunteer Blue, which should be finished this afternoon.
You
If
could
it's
never
completely,
mention.
if it's completely public, is it really corruption?
Right.
I do,
Yes.
I do believe so. No,
Right.
he is
It's pollution.
amazing. He is a genius at corruption.
Did you guys see that cartoon? Nixon saying, "I am not a crook," and then Trump saying, "I'm a crook." So what?
The best crook ever.
Yeah.
The greatest crook ever. Yeah.
We can
Well,
learn
of course
from
he's the
him.
greatest crook. I mean, everything's always the greatest ever.
He can even knows how to design aircraft carriers, I believe.
Apparently.
The catapults should be powered by steam.
Yes, yes.
And Bill,
Fossil fuel.
get us to this. The tower should be moved back from the rear of the craft to the center of the craft.
Yeah, right. He thinks somehow some earlier design of aircraft carrier was more aesthetically pleasing. I'm not sure what that means.
Well, I think
it needs $100 billion or something like that to make it.
I think an aircraft carrier needs to have a ball rim in it, doesn't it?
Well, according to Tom Friedman, I think, at least in today's column, aircraft carriers are probably not the way to go in the future.
At all. Yeah, I've had some reflections on that.
Yeah, but they so turn them into resorts.
Make them residential, the way office buildings are being made residential.
Yeah, no kidding.
Jeff Fox, you're on.
Okay, thanks. I was very sorry to miss last week's because but I did hear the podcast. I'm hoping to get a chance to talk to Rick a little bit more about his background. It was fascinating. He and I knew each other in college. I was born in Chicago, went to Lake Forest High School, which is not very far from Chicago, and studied Latin and French. I didn't keep up the Latin at all, but I did develop my French, and I can now actually converse in it if I have to, and write a little bit in it, and I use it a lot in recent novel. My language, the language I use most these days is Spanish, and I was a sociologist. Now I'm a fiction writer, and I've written a lot of short stories in Spanish. I sign them with a pseudonym, Baltasar Lotroyo. Lotroyo is el otro yo, that is the other self, the alter ego. So Baltasar Lotroyo has a lot of publications, and so anyway, I'm living in Spain and writing fiction.
Such a hard life, as we like.
Yeah, it is tough. It is tough, and we've got a lot of problems in Spain. But in our little corner of Andalusia, we've been saved. There were big earthquakes recently, just the past few days in Granada, but didn't touch us. And there were huge forest fires in many parts of the country. But again, we have not been touched, so we're okay so far.
And you have a head of state who is perfectly happy to stick it in thumbs up in Trump's eye whenever seems to be indicated, leading the way in Europe.
Yeah.
But I expect we'll come back to that.
Yeah, we're very pleased to have that government here in Spain.
John Woodford, please.
Hi. Yep. Well, I took a couple of years of Latin in high school, and then a year in college, so I could get out of the requirement, and 2 years of French in high school.
Back after this, I'm unable to interrupt.
French in college. So I got Latin and French. Took Anglo-Saxon. Not a useful language for most people, but you know,
not anymore. It used to be.
Very nice poetry in Anglo-Saxon. And let's see. So I grew up across from Chicago in Benton Harbor, Michigan, which has only varies from 9 to 16,000 people, from 16 down to about 9. And that's now I'm in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And I've always been editing and writing stuff.
Writing stuff, huh? Yes, I think that probably would be an understatement.
Yeah.
Rick Wolf, we put you through it last week, but got to hear your précis today as well.
Well, as you may remember, my parents were immigrants from Europe, and when I went to high school in New Rochelle, New York, a suburb of New York, my father asked me after the first day how I found my Latin and Greek classes. And I informed my father that there was no such thing. And my father looked at me with that view in which he was, without saying it, questioning my commitment to the truth. So I had to make the point more emphatically that, yes, there was no such thing. The next morning, he went with me to the high school. To my everlasting embarrassment, took me into the principal's office. Now you can see my embarrassment was getting worse, and confronted the principal with remarks to the effect that what kind of education does the United States give its young people if there's no Latin and there's no Greek? The principal apparently had this experience before. Very kindly sat my father down and explained to him that no one in their right mind would ever study Greek, and hadn't done so in the New Rochelle school system ever. However, as a compromise, if he could get 4 other sets of parents of somebody in the high school, so that there would be 4 of us who wanted Latin, the school would go and find a teacher to give us Latin, which they did. And so I had several years Latin in high school, uh, but I didn't need it because I spoke French and German anyway. I could always get by because I had the language in my head the way young people do. Even though my parents were refugees from the Second World War and all of that, they had grown up in a German cultural environment, both of them, even though my father is technically French. He was born in the city of Metz. Those of you who know European geography, that's right in Alsace. That is half German, half French. When you go into a store there, you don't know when you go into the store whether the family running the store is French or German, and you need to know the two languages. So anyway, despite Germany's awful role in the war, and despite my parents both being refugees, uh, they did not have that view that many others did about wanting nothing to do with things German. Quite the contrary. I was presented with German literature, German music, you name it. If it's German, I know all about it because that was what my parents they wanted me to understand the difference between German culture on the one hand and it's a little bit like the joking we're making here about Mr. Trump. We want somehow the United States, or at least a good part of it, to be understood as not represented, particularly by Mr. Trump.
Right.
Right on.
I can understand that.
Put right on the money. Jack Hammond, please.
Yeah, I grew up in Long Island suburbs until I was 15, and then I moved to Virginia, where I lived for 2 years before going to college, and that was a rather important formative experience. But I won't bother with that because it has nothing to do with foreign languages. Pardon me. Of which I took French and Latin in high school to very little effect. But my first real second language was German. I studied it. I went to spend summer in Germany during college, and I had a job, so I was interacting with German-speaking people all day long. And I'm happy to report, I was thinking about this recently, a lot of people want to practice their English with me and wherever I am, preventing me from being able to learn anything about the language. I got to be fairly fluent in German. That didn't happen there. And I came back and wrote a thesis as a German history major. But after that, I moved in a different linguistic direction, and I really don't use my German at all. I probably would, it's probably of no good to me. I did go to Peru in the Peace Corps, learn Spanish, became a Latin Americanist, a Latin American specialist, also spent time in Portugal and in Brazil. So I learned Portuguese. Spanish, I learned fluently. I lived there for a couple of years in the Peace Corps and I studied it. Portuguese, I picked up off the street. And my Portuguese at first consisted of basically Spanish trying to modify the accent a little bit. And people who would talk to me would hear me and they would think I was speaking Spanish. So the Portuguese people, when I was first there, they would think I was speaking Spanish. So they would talk to me in their Spanish, which was kind of like my Portuguese. But eventually I learned to distinguish the two and really the three, because Portugal and Brazil, or Portuguese and Brazilian, are pretty different. So I do consider myself fluent in all of those things. And I wrote a book about Portugal, another book about El Salvador, and did research in other Latin American countries. Meanwhile, got a PhD in sociology at the University of Chicago and moved to New York about 56 years ago, where I first taught at Columbia, and then I taught at City University, Hunter College, and a graduate center for 46 years, was retiring 3 years ago.
What were you teaching?
Sociology.
Mhm.
Right. Specializing, as I said, in Latin America, but also that it wasn't, I couldn't be a full-time Latin Americanist at Hunter College because there wasn't that much interest. So most of my sociological teaching was about the United States or about modernized countries, some extent about underdeveloped countries. And I specialized in social movements and social inequality, and in the last few years, environmental sociology.
So we have more than one sociologist among us, professional.
Well, that was my field too.
Exactly, Jeff. And you also have the envy of people like me who've not learned those other languages. Of course, arrayed across our screen here are.
And Jeff and I did not know each other at Harvard, but we met on something at an occasion that relates to both of our Spanish-speaking experiences, namely on a trip to Cuba
Right,
in when was
right.
1973.
Uh-huh. Oh, I didn't remember what the year was. Thanks. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I didn't get
Yes, I
that.
remember that. Somehow, we got they put us in the same room in was it the Hotel Nacional, I think.
Cindy,
Mm-hmm.
go ahead,
Yeah.
John. You had something to say, John.
I was saying Cindy's turn.
It
Okay,
is indeed Cindy's term, and
If-
from yet another language, Italy.
Yeah, yes, I in high school I did Latin because my dad said I had to, and I did French also, which I had better teachers in Latin than in French. After college, I went to the Peace Corps in Turkey, and of course had to learn Turkish. And then from 1970 on, I've lived in Italy, and I learned Italian, of course, and forgot a lot of the rest of the languages, particularly Turkish. And in my family, which was just me, my husband, and my son, my husband very often they were very good in English. My son bilingual, and in the evenings, very often when we were all kind of tired, they both spoke Italian, and I, who didn't really want to spend any more energy on agreement of adjectives and nouns, I would just speak English, and we could understand each other just fine. And even mixing up in the same Italian and English, still do that. Yeah.
We could hope that the world would go in that direction. So that leaves me, before we turn it over to you, Bob. Not unlike one other tale recounted here, between my junior and senior year in high school. Have I told this tale before? I may have. Out with my language teacher, my Latin teacher, and Latin club, junior classical league. She said to me she wanted me to go to Harvard and be a minister. Of course, you know, I'm an Indiana farm boy, so this was in the Indiana countryside. And I said to her, "That's nice, Miss Rank. What is Harvard?" Only because she said that to me that we're on this Zoom here with me today. Without going further, I will add a couple of personal notes. You've already seen I got a call in here, which I'll do afterwards, to schedule an MRI. More on that later. Our cat died last night at 4 morning.
And Garrett?
20, almost 20-year-old black cat that for the last 2 or 3 years has slept up here on my shoulders. The whole household is in mourning. Barbara's daughter got on a train the very first thing this morning so she could be here. Enough on that. It's not your household, not your cat.
Wow.
But to know. Bob, we said we were going to be brief. Well, here we are at the half hour. I don't know how brief we were.
We're
Set too
incapable
good a
of brief.
standard for you on this. Your
No,
brevity.
but this is very good because I have a little bit of an idea about other people's backgrounds, and I can try and mention a few things that we have in common. first of all, seems that about 2/3 of us are New Yorkers, more or less. And I myself was born in Manhattan. And till the age of 3, I lived in Manhattan and in a place called Castle Village. And then from the ages of 3 to 5, I also lived in New Rochelle. And so, like Rick did a little bit later, um, and then the family moved to Hartford, Connecticut. I spent, that's basically where I grew up. Um, there was a family business that we had with a factory there and a main sales office in New York. And my father was in New York a couple of days a week. So we always maintained an apartment there. And so um, at any rate, and then later after Harvard, I I went to Columbia Law School, so I spent another 3 years in New York, and so at any rate, I am attuned to the New York mentality, as I mentioned in an email to Rick. Woody Allen has described that as being a combination of paranoia and aggression and cynicism. But at any rate, I am attuned to that humor, and that's probably the main thing that has helped me survive over the years. Um, I must say that law school was a big letdown after Harvard, because at Harvard, I really could indulge my quite varied interest in all sorts of things. And as I mentioned, I was only given a degree in general studies because I didn't have enough credits in any one discipline for them to give me the degree that way. I went to after law school. I went to a business school in France where the curriculum was in 3 languages, 20% German, um, and then the rest divided between English and French. And I had a
Was it
mentor from
INSEAD, Bob?
so that INSEAD, yes.
Yep.
And my mentor actually was the godfather of the school, named George Dorio.
Oh my goodness, the father of venture capital.
Yes, that's right. He was the first American venture capitalist. His
General
company,
Dorio. Yes, yes.
exactly, and his company, American Research and Development, was quoted on the New York Stock Exchange, in fact. But and he was one of the inventors of the business plan, and which fortunately uh, is no longer stressed so much, particularly the compulsory part where you had to have uh, 5 years of financial forecasts. That was always tedious to do, and it was always inaccurate and whatnot. But now we've graduated to doing so-called lean startup, where you develop a minimum viable product, test it out with early people, pivot and change it, and hopefully get to the point where you have a business model that can be scaled. But at any rate, I went to INSEAD. I stayed on as a teaching assistant. Then I worked at an international law firm named Couder Brothers in their London office. I went to Washington to work in the Treasury Department in international taxes, and somehow I stayed in Washington. But since I was traveling a lot and I spoke a number of languages, most people I knew thought that I worked for the CIA. And in fact, there had been a couple of attempts to recruit me, which I resisted over the years. But I ended up being a serial entrepreneur after having done a number of things as a lawyer and a consultant and manager, and basically working a transatlantic effort to help people expand their activities from one continent to the other and transfer technologies and doing sort of, I was sort of like an odd jobs guy, putting together all sorts of different things, direct investments in joint ventures and licenses and all sorts of things. And I ended up working with some really brilliant people. And the clients were brilliant, but generally too, because if you were good enough at something to want to expand to another continent, you generally had something going for you. So just by chance, I was lucky because I just bumbled into everything that I did. And even as a serial entrepreneur, which is sometimes called being a multiple masochist because it's not easy to do. I I somehow was doing very, very stimulating things. I mean, I was always too independent for my own good and resisted working for large organizations because I hated all of the political activity and ego rivalry and all the poisonous things that you often ran into. So I avoided that, but I had to suffer for it. And at any rate, to make a long story short, after 25 years of mainly transatlantic activity and spending at least a month of every year in Europe and a large part of that in France and working in many different areas, everything from defense to to wine and a lot of things in between. Sort of like an odd jobs guy, um, but also working with some really brilliant people. I mean, like in the defense area, I had an American colleague who was very good in government contracts, and I recruited 8 uh, medium-sized defense firms, who European ones, for helping them sell to the Pentagon. And they did very well, and half of them ended up acquiring their American competitors.
Hmm.
But although I do have this background, business background, that I could go into in a lot more detail, um, I do I do sympathize with people. I understand that people like my friend Rick, who got me into this group, uh, are enthusiastic about socialism. And I, as mentioned last time, when I asked Rick about it, I'm enthusiastic about cooperatives and self-management, self-government type things. And I have been fascinated by them, and but never had a chance to apply it. And it's just amazing. Starting with a Brazilian guy named Ricardo Semler, and another guy named Frederick Laloux, a Belgian. There were all sorts of interesting things, and uh, I was surprised that Jeff mentioned that he had heard of Mandergron before and maybe had a refrigerator they bought from him. But Mandergron is a Basque country network of cooperatives started by a Spanish priest after the Spanish Civil War. It currently employs about 170,000 people. And for someone who is interested in cooperatives. I mean, that was the first example, a successful example of people raising themselves by their bootstraps um, in a cooperative way. But it's a complicated field, but absolutely fascinating. And Lalou ties it into the evolution of of civilization, starting with how we used to have. He has a color code, red organizations that were authoritarian, and going through yellow organizations that were cooperative, and finally, at top, he has teal organizations where people are cooperative with one another. They help enrich each other's lives. Uh, these are mainly decentralization efforts. So you have a team of people who relate to each other, but they make all the decisions, and the so-called managers are just coaches.
Well,
But
Bob,
anyhow, it's a fascinating field,
are you
and I
giving
maybe
us
get into
the segue into our discussion? I think so.
uh-huh.
And if I could notice, even though you have pointed out that you did a lot of bumbling, I have a feeling you are saying out loud what applies to the lives of several people we have on the screen here. I think it's very clear from what we know about them.
Yeah, well, you're right. In fact, I am very interested in doing things to try and enable the attainment of the Sustainable Development Goals, and um, of course, the bumbling and the diversity. I guess, like a lot of people here, I mean, there was more of it. I spent 5 years when I was about half of the time in Kazakhstan when I was in my mid 50s. And somehow I learned Russian, though my brain seemed to have turned to stone. I used to pick up languages very easily. And I spent about 5 years working with the Koreans on Korean American projects. So,
So you got to
and
learn
there was,
Korean too, Hangul, and so forth. So thank you. Terrific. Uh, that's an excellent sense. It does raise the question. Hemp, you had said, uh, democratic socialism, Bob, has taken us to uh, this three-colored layer of possibilities. Who's got thoughts?
So I would like to, something that I didn't mention, but is relative, sort of following up on what Bob has just been talking about, and our perhaps we'll get to discussing what socialism means and what it means to the DSA and so on. So when I was 16 years old, after many years of Hebrew school, I didn't mention that part, I worked on an Israeli ship and then on Israeli kibbutzim. And that was in 1957. Israel was only 9 years old at that time, and I was led into the illusion that I was part of a socialist paradise, or was going to be a socialist paradise.
you
And
must have been a cabin boy.
what's that?
At that age, you must have been a cabin boy.
I was what's called a deck boy. It was
Uh-huh.
a freighter. I was a deck boy, and I was painted and washed the decks and so on. Anyway, the point was, yes, I was speaking Hebrew and all of that, but my interest was that the ship was owned by the Labor Federation, the Histadrut. The port was owned by the Histadrut. The kibbutzim were cooperatives. Very in those days,
Sure.
everything was shared. Childcare, cooking, doing the laundry. Everybody did everything, and so on. So that was my introduction to something like socialism. Well, one part of the story is what's happened to that. The Zim line is now owned by a Miami millionaire who owns Carnival Cruises. The port of Haifa, which I came into, is now owned by an Indian billionaire who is very close to the Modi regime. And of course, Israel has become basically a fascist country in all sorts of ways. The support for anything like socialism, even ideologically, has disappeared. My first night in Israel, I went to a Mapam kibbutz, a left-wing party, and the guy had a statuette on his bookcase of Lenin. And so on. That's disappeared entirely. So the story of that initial socialist idealism and what it covered over also is something of interest to me, and I've actually been reading a lot about that in recent years.
So how did Israel
exciting.
evolve away from socialism?
Right.
What?
Hang on one sec, please. Jack has got his hand up.
Yeah. I mentioned that I wrote a book about Portugal. It was about the Portuguese Revolution, which was, by the people making it, considered it a socialist revolution, although what that means is very ambiguous, very different from what we're talking about today when we ask what is the socialism of DSA, for example. But during that time, there was a lot of capital flight and capital by foreign enterprises that had factories in Portugal. And capital flight, you can take away the mobile capital, meaning the financial part, but you can't take away the factory. And so a lot of these factories were taken over by their workers and turned into cooperatives. And this was an important part of my study. How did they work? How did they manage within, what was still clearly a capitalist economy, world economy, and they had been founded to be subordinate branches of this capitalist economy. But a number of them thrived, a number of them didn't. But I was very interested to observe the social relations among people in a cooperative, which the capitalist owners had abandoned. And I found pretty uniformly that social relations were very good. They were more dedicated to their work as a cooperative than they had been as employees of the capitalist company, which was very revealing to me. But I would also say that the prospects of thriving under those conditions depended a lot on support that they got from the interim socialist government and depended on the survival and good political fortune of that socialist government, which turned against it. The long story, the military had been the basis, young officers had been the basis of the revolution, but some of them went the other way and the military intervened against the revolution. But for the enterprises, for the firms, it was for at least a short while a really important experience, however, very weakened by the circumstances in which it started. And there are experiences of this in many countries in the world that I've at least read about, found to be very similar. And even in the United States, we have a phenomenon which is sometimes called lemon socialism, meaning the business is a lemon and the owners withdraw and the workers try to take it over and turn it back into a going enterprise. The circumstances, financial and otherwise, legal, and a lot of other circumstances are pretty difficult. But some of these firms have survived and have thrived generally in a minor way. They don't grow. They don't. They don't become major businesses, but at least they're important enough. They're working well enough to support the workers who work there. Bob mentioned Mondragon in Spain, which is a very different story, but has become, as you mentioned, huge. More than 100,000 workers, I believe, in a whole bunch of different plants making a whole bunch of different things. And I don't know why that may have gone in that direction compared to most other experiences of, cooperatives founded or taken over from formerly existing capitalist businesses.
So I notice you don't necessarily see a connection between Basque Country and what happened for that period in Portugal. What I am struck by is your own work said that this period in Portugal led to satisfaction on the part of the workers. And if we pair that with the observation that growth is not necessarily the be all and end all, rather simply stability and quality of life for the workers instead of 9 to 5, punching a time clock and so forth. There are elements in there for putting some of the pieces together.
Yeah, let me
Please.
make one
Bob.
comment if I could. The putting these different cooperative activities into effect is not proved to be simple, and the organizations that do this, that, for example, Lalou describes, they make a big effort to recruit people who want to share and are open-minded and tolerant and that sort of thing, because a lot of people couldn't and wouldn't work in this kind of organization. And one of the things that interests me in having these things be able to be implemented, as well as more broadly, the kind of government activities that and cooperation that we're going to need, is the field of positive psychology that I've taken an interest in over the last 10 years. And I wish that I had been aware of the precedents to that years ago. Would have made my life a lot easier. But we can look into that at some time. I also wanted to mention that Rick had a very intelligent podcast that I heard the other day on China and why and how we are very foolish in our attitude towards China, and it's worth seeing. But on top of that, as a good follow-up, there was a Peter Diamandis Moonshots podcast yesterday about the Chinese endgame, so-called. And this is taking into account all the developments of technology that are happening at a blinding pace, and the actual way that the Chinese government runs itself. They interviewed a guy who is an American citizen, partly Chinese extraction, but who spent a long time as a technologist in China. It's absolutely fascinating, but it's worth checking out. It's
Bob, you can put those
well,
links.
China's
Bob, if you would.
China's endgame. It's number 281 of the Moonshot podcast on
So you
YouTube.
can put those links in the chat here, and we can see
Okay, I'll
if that's
try.
the
Yeah.
best way to convey those things. Now, you've given us several threads
I
here.
want to follow up on one thing that Bob said, which is that it
Then
seems as
Hamp. Yes,
those
thanks,
require.
Ted. Go ahead.
Sorry?
Please, yes.
it seems as though cooperatives require a special kind of person, somebody who is engaged in creating the kinds of social relations that we'd like to see happen. I would say, I know Oscar Wilde said the problem with socialism is it takes up too many evenings. And I think that's in a way true. It requires an engagement, a willingness to contribute, to give a lot of your time. Although going back to the Portuguese cases that I studied, these organizations had cooperativism thrust upon them. They didn't choose it. And nevertheless, I think for them too, it created the kind of engagement, the sense that you're in control, that you really are, as a member of the cooperative, you own the business that you're working for, and that contributes strongly to people's motivation.
So one of the questions here is whether or not people are disposed, or even if they're not disposed, to still work. Hamp's got his hand up.
Yeah, and I have a client in a couple of minutes, so I can't stay here. But I'd be very interested to explore sustainable models of socialism in the future. What is held up rather than turning like kibbutzim into sort of fascism. And to just see what is workable. Fareed Zakaria was saying how Sweden was successful because it let go of socialism and became more capitalist or more of a mixed economy on a Sunday program. And I just like to understand what is sustainable and workable in socialism and in the DSA.
That is very nice, Hamp.
Materials.
Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt. Please go ahead.
No, that's okay. I need to go.
And we need to honor that. We can still go on a bit, but frankly, I think we've set the scene for our next open mic discussion. I think you just said it very nicely, Hamp. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Okay. Well, good. Good to see you guys again.
Yes, indeed.
So when are we going to dive into DSA?
We don't have anything scheduled for next week, so let's just say we are going to schedule next week. That's when we're going to dive into DSA.
Sure.
Right.
Building
so
on
open mic,
what Bob has given us here, and Jack, and the summary that Hamp just put in front of us. And remember, this is recorded. If you'd like to go back and look, you can buzz through the recording to the part you want to see.
Yeah.
Super.
I'm sorry that next week I'm going to be away on vacation with limited YouTube, limited Wi-Fi capability.
That is the problem.
I'll try to link if I can.
Great.
But
hopefully I won't have an MRI scheduled then, and so forth.
I am a member of DSA, although I'm moderately active. I'm not.
First class. That means we have a view from the inside.
Right. And that would conform to what John Woodford suggested. He said, I suggest we get a knowledgeable veteran member of the DSA to discuss that movement. Definitely not the young, poorly informed patsy that David Remnick chose to set up for his article. I don't know that it was a setup, but she was pretty poor. So,
Jack, you're on.
Yeah.
What can I tell
Jack, you're our expert. We're as good as we got.
Yeah. Okay, good.
Terrific introduction for next week.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. We ready today? Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody.
See you in a week. Yes.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep.